Welcome to the 13th episode of Renegade Thinkers Live, a show that promises to be long on marketing insights and short on overhyped buzzwords. We'll be drinking in the latest tactics and the coolest gin. Yep, this may be the only live marketing show that also features a gin tasting. Today's show is being live streamed via our friends at Restream, and if you want to drink along at home, today we're tasting Barr Hill Reserve Tomcat Gin. I'm your host, Ruane, live from my home studio in New York City. We used to say talk is cheap, which is somewhat ironic coming from a show host. That's a pause for a little laughter there. But now we can safely replace that notion with the idea that capital is cheap, really cheap. Interest rates are at historic lows. SPACs are booming. If you don't know what those are, look it up. PE and VC firms seem to be flush with capital. The result is that companies are being swallowed up faster than you can say, hello, Renegade Thinkers. And when that happens, you end up with a stew of brands, some of which are tossed out, perhaps prematurely, while others stick around too long, clogging up your messaging. It's not an easy process with easy answers, and you can screw it up big time. As Jennifer Renault and I talked about in episode 166 of Renegade Thinkers Unite, she was at Oracle when they decided to drop the Eloqua brand from its website a few years back. And sure enough, all the Eloquens out there stopped going to the website and leads torpedoed. No doubt there is a need for brand name consolidation. But how do you do this without losing equity and the business value in the acquired companies? To address this challenge, we've got three veteran CMOs with us today. First up is Grant Johnson, CMO of Emburse. He was also the CMO of Kofax a few years back and the stars of episode 31 and 32. Anyway, hey, Grant, great to see you.
Hey, Drew, it's great to be here. Happy to join everyone.
Let's start with your situation at Emburse. How many brands do you have, and were all these through acquisition?
Yeah, that's a great question. It took me a while actually to complete the list. We have 7 brands. The first company was launched, Nexania, in 2002. And over time, you mentioned the firm PE, our private equity firm, K1 Investments. They purchased an entire portfolio. And as we got to scale and much larger, we decided it would be more efficient to consolidate the brands under a new master brand, Emburse, which we launched in January of 2020.
So you had these 7 brands, and you still have these 7 brands, and you've got Emburse on top. All right. So for the moment, we have Emburse is a house of brands, if you will, like P&G with Tide and Pampers. But it's got to be challenging to have any kind of economy of scale with so many brands, right? I mean, some of these are the same customers. So how are you weaning people off the original brand and onto Emburse, if you are at all?
Well, actually, it's a 2-part answer, Drew. The first part is it was a house of brands, but we had outlined a strategy whereby we would bring our customers along the brand unification journey. So when we launched it, we would say certified by Emburse or Cromer by Emburse, which is what is commonly known as an endorsed strategy, right? But we had always intended that over time it would be a master brand. So fast forward 1 year from launch of January 2020, in January of this year, we launched the refinement to our brand strategy as a shared brand. So today, across all digital print properties, websites, social media, you'll see the word Emburse in front of every brand. So Emburse Certified, Emburse Chrome River, Emburse Nexania. And, quite frankly, we want customers not to notice any disruption to their business. So we've had customers sort of embrace Emburse, if you will. And part 2 to the question is, they're actually not the same customers. We have a tailored strategy whereby we have small business, medium business, large business, nonprofits, Europe-based brands. And so we let the customer best fit select the product. And we're keeping all these brands over time. And what we're doing is introducing all new products under the Emburse master brand. So Emburse Cards, for example, or Emburse Pay, our payment products and so forth. Emburse services like Emburse audit. And so over time, in the next couple of years, when it's a master brand, it's Emburse Invoice or Emburse Pay, customers will have had the experience of being on this journey with us, and there'll be no disruption to the business, which is really one of our overriding goals.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key thing with all of this is I know a lot of marketers are in a rush to get this done. It's like, rip the Band-Aid, let's go. The problem is these companies have loyalty, and people are loyal to the brand and the people at that brand. And it's not an instant transference. And it's interesting to me, I interviewed Ann Lunas, the CMO of Adobe, right after they had purchased both Magento and Marketo, both of them at $4 billion acquisitions. And I asked her, so are you a house of brands or a branded house? And she said, no, we're a branded house. But if you watch what they're doing, they are migrating. They are not walking away from either Marketo or Magento anytime soon. So what you're describing makes a lot of sense to me. You do it methodically, you bring them along. Okay, so what's the hardest part about this migration for you, the CMO?
Well, the hardest part is really bringing everybody together at the formulation stage of the strategy. Some of our what we call now product lines have founders in them, and they came up with their baby, that name, right? And they don't want to see that name go away. Their customers have, become advocates of that brand. So we find ways, both from a visual identity, where we have a color palette that each of the product lines has its own distinct color, helps it feel a little bit more unique and brings that heritage forward. But getting the stakeholders around this, having internal coordination, making sure folks follow a very comprehensive brand guideline that my team put into place, what's in brand, what's out of brand, what's acceptable, what's not, and making sure that we can have a consistent brand identity and brand expression across all touch points, so that over time we build the equity at the Emburse level. And we sort of lift up the existing equities, and those can accrue to the benefit of Emburse over time.
So I'm sort of imagining all these sort of parallel streams, but eventually they're merging into the Mississippi.
That's right. And, you think about software integration, think of an Oracle, you mentioned larger companies, Adobe, and over time, you're not going to have one user interface, but we're developing a more common user interface. So if you move between apps and you add a different capability, you feel like you're on the same platform. If you're paying a bill or you're scanning a travel expense, and we all get back to travel with your phone, it looks like the same app from the App Store. It's all Emburse, and it's very, consistent for customer experience and those understood benefits.
Well, and we'll get to this, I think, in the later conversation, but there are some real benefits of this single brand. But let's move on and bring up Kevin Ruane, who is the CMO of Precisely, the star of episode 217 of Renegade Thinkers Unite, where we really talked a lot about the challenge that you face. So, hey, Kevin, how are you?
Good, Drew. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm great. Thank you for joining us today. Your situation is quite a bit different from Grant's in that you had to retire a brand name as part of so you didn't have any choice, but there's a lot of things that you had to do in a 6-month period to sort of bring everybody along. Can you talk about some of that?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. So we brought two similarly sized businesses together, a company that I was with called SyncSort, a legacy mainframe business around for many years, with the software and data business of Pitney Bowes. And so as part of that deal, we needed to cease using the Pitney Bowes brand and marks, within 6 months of the close of the transaction. And so we had a little bit of a decision point to make where we felt like we needed a new brand. The SyncSort brand had outlived its usefulness, and the brand permissions were kind of limited to the business we had become, which was much more broader with a richer set of data management offerings. So we were either going to have an interim step of transitioning the Pitney Bowes brand into the SyncSort brand and then ultimately to the new brand, or we could take a really aggressive approach and in a very intense time frame, move both of those towards a new brand, which is what we did with Precisely.
And so, this is really interesting because suddenly now you have no equity. Right.
Correct.
I mean, you had SyncSort and you had Pitney Bowes. So what did this mean? What did you have to do to sort of try to go from literally zero to whatever you had with SyncSort and whatever you had with Pitney Bowes?
Yeah, and then on top of that, Drew, you had both of those businesses had grown through acquisition, so there were a number of legacy brands that sat underneath them. And I think it's a lot of what you and Grant were just speaking about, which is it's taking a gradual approach. We had to really understand from that customer's perspective, from the market's perspective, what is the equity of those brands that exist? And so the way that we've approached it was to try to, find a thoughtful and simple way to establish some product brand families. And so what we did was we've matched up the Precisely name with some of those product brands that had a particular amount of equity and that our customers really had used and loved for many, many years because the products are great and worked and because they got great support from the businesses that had, put those products into market. And we were trying to really make that connection between things like Precisely and a brand like Trillium, which has been 15 years a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data quality products, to make that connection, to sort of gradually bring, those customers along for the journey, and start to build that, brand equity in Precisely as a brand that stands for something great and is backed by, proven products and expertise that works.
So as I recall from our podcast, I mean, you had hundreds of little products in there in that mix.
We
right?
do. We've got 150 products today in the portfolio, and many of them are kind of sub products within some of these larger brands.
Which is just, again, is so challenging from a marketing standpoint, particularly in B2B, when you're competing with larger brands often, right? Mm-hmm. To have all these brands. So how did you decide? I mean, were there some brands that you just sort of said, okay, it's okay, we can sort of let this one go? And how did you make that decision?
Yeah, we really looked and took a focused hard look at how we're going to market. And each year we establish about a dozen we call them our focus sales plays, which are the go-to-market motions around particular sets of products where we kind of make our bets and put the weight of our sales and marketing efforts behind. And so we really started there. What are your growth products? What are the kind of the ones that, are most likely to help you achieve plan for the year and over the next few years? And so we kind of started there. So there are kind of a long tail of products that, still work or still used very successfully by customers that we put a little bit less focus on. And it's okay to let them sort of have their legacy names and brand and continue to drive the value that they drive for our customers. But the ones that we're marketing on the website and doing our PR around and really trying to make noise in the market with, that's where we really wanted to prioritize. And I think it comes down to about 20 or 25 sort of key products that get then wrapped into a smaller set of product brand families.
So 25 out of 150. So there's some product managers out there there's 125 of them, if you will, that are going, where's the love? They've got to be on, okay, we're not that important. I mean, how do you sort of, that's part one of this question. Part two of this question is, from a web standpoint, do those brands disappear? You can't find them on the Precisely website?
Correct. Yeah. So what I would say is with some of those product managers, Drew, I may not be their most favorite person in the world, but that's okay. That's the job I've signed up for. I think what we've tried to do, Drew, is we tried to kind of take a look at it from the customer's perspective and the market's perspective. And what you find is a lot of these products actually boil down to a set of capabilities that customers are looking for. So if you more market around the trends and the capabilities, you can kind of group things together logically. So while you may not see that product or kind of legacy brand name on the website, you'll see content and materials that speak to the value it can deliver for customers in the broader context of their data management environments. And so I think we're trying to change the rules a little bit, because what we found is there wasn't going to be an approach, especially we're in a private equity backed model that kind of drives focus and trade-offs. And so we knew we needed to kind of change the game, because there was no way that it would scale to support 150 products. And quite frankly, trying to jam that on a website was going to just cause confusion. And one of the things we find is one of our big opportunities is a cross-sell opportunity. So the more simple we can make it for customers who have a product and love that product to explore other pieces of the portfolio, that's a winning formula for us. And it just simplifies it for everybody.
Yeah, all of this, and I know this sounds ridiculously simple, and we're going to move on to talk to Josh now. But the thing that the purpose of a brand name is essentially to say, hey, you can trust this product. That's it, right? And so the attachment to that name is trust. So anyway, and so if you have a bunch of names, you're just making life more difficult. And it's like, oh wait, what do I do with? Is it this one or is that one? All right, but anyway, let's bring on Josh, who's patiently been waiting in the batter's box here. So Josh Leatherman, CMO of Service Express, star of episode 179 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. So Josh, how are you?
I'm well, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and you're not quite the last thing before we get to the gin tasting, so I don't want you to feel like you need to rush to that, because I know both of us are anxious to get to that. But anyway, what is your situation when it comes to sort of legacy brands in terms of where Service Express is?
Yeah, so first of all, brand acquisition at Service Express is exclusively through M&A. So we've acquired a few domestic brands, and in January, we announced our first international acquisition. So we're kind of walking through that right now. Most of the brands have been around since the mid 80s or early 90s. Our philosophy is this. It may sound simple, but it's actually pretty hard in practice, particularly when you're private equity backed and they have an M&A strategy. Good acquisitions make great brands. Bad acquisitions make bad brands. Some of the best investments we've made for the growth of Service Express are the acquisitions that we walked away from. The best marketers can do very little to overcome a bad acquisition, right? It's like putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
So we start by ensuring the selection process for new brands aligns well with our culture as a company and our customer first obsession.
So interesting. So in other words, and I'm trying to make sure I understand this, you want to acquire companies that have good brand value, if you will, that there's equity in that. Okay. Absolutely. So we've acquired brands that have equity, because if they don't have equity, there's probably other problems, right? There are probably relationship issues and other things, and it's a very transactional kind of situation. Okay. So then now they're part of ServiceNow. What are you doing with those brands?
Service Express. So,
I'm sorry, Service Express. Pardon me.
That's okay. But I'll tell you, Service Express has integrations through ServiceNow with our Express Connect product. So we're big fans of ServiceNow. So first, what do we go through when we consolidate the brands? So first, we take our time. Our philosophy is don't break anything. They're good brands. Again, we're highly selective in the brands we bring on. They've got good equity, so don't break anything. As soon as we announce an acquisition, we co-brand, right? So we put a lot of resources behind announcing a new acquisition. There's press releases, there's earned media, social campaigns, customer communication. We don't want to lose the association that we've created in the PR initiative between the two brands. So we co-brand right away. Everything from social profiles to email signatures to customer billing statements. We make sure that we leverage those opportunities to build the association of brands. From there, we're looking at two things. One is story, right? So for every good acquisition, the Service Express story evolves, even if in nuance. The acquisition strengthens how we can serve our customers. It increases our capabilities, be it features, geographically, whatever. So we want to understand and articulate how the story has evolved. We do that oftentimes through traditional brand architecture. And number two, we look at segments. How has our segments changed? Are there new ICPs or ideal customer profiles to go after, new accounts or prospects, verticals to go after? We go to work on defining the new total addressable market that the brand will need to build awareness and affinity for.
And so with this, really interesting to me, and there's so many things I want to dive into on that. So a lot of the things that you said make a lot of sense, and I hadn't thought of them in necessarily that order. But how that acquisition enhances your story. Can you give an example, a specific example of that with one of the acquisitions that you did in the last 6 months to a year?
Yeah, so our most recent acquisition is Blue Chip. It's our first international one. They are based in the UK. Blue Chip opens up, additional services that we can offer that provide great value to our customers. They've got some intellectual property there that we can leverage and build into the story. So we're kind of working through understanding exactly how that translates to our domestic customers and how what we do translates to our international customers now with Blue Chip.
In an ideal world, obviously, the acquisition strategy is that 1 + 1 = 3. So there's some cross-sell, upsell, expanded. So now that you have international, in theory, if you had a customer that wanted to go international, you could service them in a way that you couldn't before.
Right.
So this all sounds methodical and great, but at what point do you say we're still investing in brand that we acquired a few years ago, and our dollars are getting diluted? When do you how do you make sure that we are still building one big brand versus lots of little brands?
Yeah, so Service Express is a platform brand. We are a platform company, right? So we focused on building the best company and the best brand that we can. Our goal is to make sure, and when you've built a good brand like Service Express, it's easier to move companies from legacy brands or brands that they love to a company that people are excited about, right? It was when Disney bought Pixar, right? It was easier. Disney has great properties. Pixar has great properties. It was easier for Disney to bring them over because they had built a really good platform company and a master brand.
Yeah.
Oftentimes also we start with the customer, not the marketing. When moving a customer from one brand to another, we try to identify quick wins with them. Nothing builds credibility more for a brand than identifying areas the new brand can provide immediate value. And that's not just marketing, right? It's marketing making sure that we've got a seat at the table, but service plays a role in this, sales plays a role in this, product plays a role in this. We've got to make sure that we bring all the teams together.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, this is a great moment. If you don't mind, listeners, I'd like to plug CMO Huddles for a second. CMO Huddles was launched in 2020, and it's an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described a huddle as a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. Grant, Kevin, Josh, anything you want to add about CMO Huddles from your experience?
I would just add, that's how you grow as a CMO. I love CMO Huddles because at Service Express, we do a lot of R&D, which is rip off and duplicate. We learn what's working really well at other companies, what other great CMOs are doing. We understand what's applicable to us, and we bring it back to our organization. And CMO Huddles is a great way to do some R&D.
I love it. I'm going to have to use that as like marketing. This CMO Huddles, come for R&D. Grant, Kevin, anything else you want to throw in there while we're here?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an intense, therapy session, but I would say that, it's a really high caliber group of, very passionate CMOs committed to their business and to helping each other. And so we can share best practices, challenge and try new ideas out, and actually don't try things that have already proven not to work. So it's very pragmatic and helpful.
Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Kevin, don't want to put you on the spot here. So,
happy to just agree with Josh and with Grant. CMO Huddles has been terrific, and it's the connections you make, and it's not just connecting on the huddles, but it's some of the connections you can make on the sidelines. There's no topic that you could want to dive deeper into that there's not someone with great expertise who's happy to share it. So it's been terrific, Drew.
There you go. Okay, cool. All right. Well, we're moving on, and what we're talking about now is with all of us is the notion of brand consolidation. And it's interesting, Josh mentioned Disney. And if you go to the Disney Channel, you actually see they are, and they have been for a long time, a house of brands. There's Disney, but there's ABC, there's Marvel, there's Pixar. And they have not walked away from those brands because those brands have tremendous equity. And also Disney has some, Disney itself, both as a parent brand and as its own brand, has its own limitations. So in B2B, however, where you're fighting for every little bit of share of voice that you can have, let's just talk about why it's so important that we get to brand consolidation, and why you're, Kevin, trying to build Precisely, and why Grant is trying to build Emburse. What's so important about building these solitary brands?
Yeah, I mean, I would add, Drew, I think it's just there's only so many resources that you have. And if you spread them too thin and across too many areas, you just won't make an impact. Even some of the most notable names in our industry, they fight for and have to really fight for that mind share. I mean, it's a noisy marketplace. And so, if you can't get that focus to make, one brand stand for something great and really put your energy and resources behind it, it's going to be a really tough road. So, there's, I think, just a simplicity of it, a focus that, kind of that brings. And, for a business like ours, it really is what's necessary to unlock that cross-sell opportunity that we think exists between our customers. So it also really aligns to support the strategy.
I agree with Kevin. More brands mean more resources that can detract from demand marketing activities and the growing list of priorities that marketing is responsible or on the field for. And I just think the volume and velocity of new brands that are being created. Our buyer is the IT buyer. It's amazing how many new companies and new brands are popping up in an attention economy where consumers are just inundated with so many brands. It can be difficult for anyone to keep them straight. And so I think it's important for companies really to put as much of their resources behind as few brands as they possibly can.
Yeah. And Grant, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in violent agreement. And, one of the philosophies I formed a long time ago is in branding, especially in tech branding, B2B branding, is you want to make it easier for customers to make choices, to understand your offering. We've all talked about ICP and value props. And so if you've got this, proliferation of brands and their confusion and overlapping, you're making it hard for customers. We all want to win in the marketplace. So simplify actually increases sales from a branding perspective.
And it's so important. Can we pause on it? Simplify improves brand sales opportunities. I just in case anybody listening does not know what an ICP is, it's ideal customer profile. Now, is there a downside to the branded house approach? I mean, have you lost any customers because you sort of retired a brand?
I can say as we've retired brands, we've not lost customers. But again, we've taken our time with it, right? We've followed the lead of the customer and the brand that we've acquired. So we have not experienced really any loss of customers.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm sure that's not something that you necessarily would want to even talk about. One of the ways that I think people hope will happen is in these sub brands will sort of represent a certain segment of the market. But it just gets clumsy, right? I mean, from a site architecture standpoint. And I think the thing that Grant mentioned is this is all about time and the absence of it, right? We just don't have that much time to, carve out a share of brain with our target audiences. So yeah, we're a big believer in the branded house approach and trying to consolidate even in these circumstances. All right, this is a perfect place for us to take a break. We're going to show a video. You're going to grab your gin and an ice whole glass, and we're going to start to taste this Barr Hill Reserve. So stay with us. Oh God, I that makes me laugh. Anyway, I'm excited to introduce the folks on the show to Barr Hill Reserve Tomcat Gin. This is really one of my all-time favorite gins. Notice a beautiful bottle, and the only gin that my wife actually drinks. In addition to being America's most awarded gin and handcrafted in Vermont, it has a couple of unique things going for it. First, it's the only botanical they use is juniper. That's it. And if you've been following along on this show, you know that most of these gins that we've been tasting have a lot of botanicals. So that's really talking about keeping things simple. And then second, after it is distilled, they add raw honey, and that helps explain why there's this bee on the label of the bottle. And this beekeeper, there's a whole backstory on all of that. So, but the way they get it, and if you look at the color of this, and this is the key thing, if you ever see brown gin, you know it's a Tomcat or Old Tom gin. And it means that it's been sitting in a barrel for a certain period of time. The darker it is, often the longer it's been in a barrel. Okay, so because it's in a barrel, this is why it is so darn sippable and tastes a little bit more like bourbon the gin. So, gentlemen, what do you think?
It has got a strong juniper taste to it, which I love in my gin. Very strong, piney taste to it. But it's not overwhelming because of the sweetness, the honey. So yeah, it's a fantastic sipping gin, I think.
Yeah, I so agree with you. The first time I had this, it's like, oh my God, this is almost an after dinner gin. Right? What do you think, Grant?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it seems mellowed. It's really smooth. You know, I would imagine a lot of folks recognize, gin and tonic or, gin mix in many types of drinks. But like you say, you can just sip this and it's very pleasant.
Yeah. Let's see. Kevin.
Yeah, I'm with Grant. It's smooth. I'll be honest with you, Drew. I'm more of maybe it's my time in Northern California. I'm more of a wine guy typically. So I was a little bit worried here. How was I going to react to it? Was I going to be able to do this live? And it's really smooth. And I think it's that honey really for me that kind of makes it.
Yeah, you are undervaluing that. And if you smell it, it has, again, it just has a little bit of that barrel-y, all of those flavors, that pine and the stuff that you were talking about, Josh, or come from the barrels. So anyway, now is a time where Nicole, maybe we know that juniper is a must-have botanical for all gins, but what's the story with juniper? Do you have a fun fact for us?
I do, actually. So the word gin actually comes from the French name for the juniper berry, Ginevra, and then it was altered by the Dutch to juniper, and then it was joined by the English to what we know today as gin. So a fun fact is that juniper berries were actually used for the first time in Holland to flavor the spirits in the 1500s when the Dutch were experimenting with different herbs to disguise the unpleasant taste of the rye-based medicines.
I love that. It's great. And it's, I've had read up on the history of gin, and just to catch you gentlemen up on, thank you, Nicole, where this thing plays out. You get to gin and tonic because you had sailors who had tonic on the ship these are English sailors, to prevent malaria. And then they had the limes on the ship to prevent scurvy. And they decided, well, we've got this tonic, we got this stupid gin from Holland, maybe we can put them all together. And that's how that came out. All right, now I'm going to do something I have never done on the show before. I'm going to give you my favorite recipe using Barr Hill Reserve Tomcat Gin. And here's the deal. It's called Drew's Mini Martini. What you do is you take, now this is for 2 people, not 1 unless you're really aggressive. You're going to take 2 ounces of this gin, put it in a shaker. You're going to drop in 10 to 15 or so torn up mint leaves, hand torn, and then you're going to muddle the heck out of it like it was a mojito. Then you're going to add 2 more ounces of gin, And then you're going to add 10 or so more torn up leaves, and you're just going to let that sit there for about 5 minutes. So the mint starts to permeate the gin. Okay. Then we're going to add some ice. You're going to shake it up, and you're going to let it sit there again for 2 to 3 minutes. That way we get a little bit of water in the gin, because you may want to do something else that evening. And so you give it one last shake, and then the trick is to pour it through a strainer. The martini, your shaker won't be enough. You need a fine strainer into a chilled martini glass, throw on a mint leaf, and you will thank me. Okay, all righty then. Let's get back to the topic at hand. And let's start with some mistakes to avoid. When we're anybody have some things they can share in this area? What are some mistakes that you've seen that can happen?
I think for me, Drew, it's the timing piece we were talking about earlier. It really is. And for me, there's not sort of a one size fits all formula. It's kind of knowing when to retire a brand versus when to continue to bring folks along for that journey and kind of, make that transition. And to me, there have been times where maybe it's felt like we've moved a little bit faster than we should have. And then there are times where, especially in a highly acquisitive environment, Josh can probably speak to this, where you don't move fast enough. And then this sort of brand debt builds up over time as well. So just trying to find that right balance of the timing is, for me, the struggle that I wish there was a better formula for.
Well, and then let's dig into that. I mean, Josh, or Grant, how do you are you looking at brand tracking and you're seeing the number going up here for your main brand and the number, how do you sort of assess this moment of, okay, we can retire now?
Yeah. So from our perspective is, we kind of work with the acquired brand, right? And we set a time frame, and then we over communicate. We over communicate with internal stakeholders, and we over communicate with the customers of the acquired brand. So everybody knows that, first of all, the brand association has been built, and it's not a surprise to anyone when the website changes over, when the logo on the masthead changes over. It's not a surprise to anyone. So we over communicate.
Yeah. So there's a big rule. No surprises for your customers. And that's the thing in these things. It feels like the customer can easily get lost, right? The PE firm's just building up value. So what can they do for it? They can sell the company off. So the customer can get lost. And that feels like something. Grant, any thoughts on other mistakes to be made, or when it's time?
Yeah, I think it was touched on before that, you communicate to all the customers, you have them become part of the larger entity, and you want to be open-minded. I remember one brand integration I did where, we only had in our color palette blue and yellow, kind of boring, and they had a more vibrant purple, and so, well, hey, we could amend the color palette. We've got a much richer color palette with Emburse, and so by design, we wanted to include these 7 brands so they had some expression. But if you want to bring the people along from the acquired company, and so you just want to be sensitive, as the others have said, about timing and communication and making them feel part of the larger whole, because they can imbue some additional associations and energy to your brand that you want to leverage.
It's funny, we haven't talked about employees in this a lot, other than, and you're right that those employees that you did want to keep through the consolidation, their connection, at least their door in, was to the acquired brand, that now you're saying all the shirts that they have and hats that they have are no longer sort of relevant, or they're relics. So employees are a big part of this. Customers are a big part of this. So when we get to the website, and this is really an interesting one, and I need your opinion on, you've got, let's say you've acquired 2 brands in the last 6 months, and you are looking, and you've got to map out a website strategy, and you're thinking that your goal is to have one website. How do you make sure that you don't lose, your customers and the SEO value from the sites that are being retired?
That's exactly what we're going through now, Drew. And so first of all, we will not do it on our own. It's a mistake that I see companies much larger than us making. Google is like the stock market. Its data is changing every day, and someone needs to be kind of finely attuned to those changes and what it means for the website. Service Express is benefiting from years of SEO equity that we and our teams have built, and it's like compound interest. Only time gives you the gift of that equity. And as marketers, we have kind of a fiduciary responsibility not to break that, not to wreck it, right? And so we will work with people who are experts, who understand custom redirects, the importance of that, the backlink strategy, short tail keywords, long tail keywords, what it means for the website integration. We will not do that by ourselves.
Right. So you need an outside expert. And I'm curious if any of you have done this where you didn't lose a step, because almost every relaunch of a website ends up with some SEO dip. But have you had a success case where you ended a website, you merged it with yours, you did all the redirects, and you didn't lose any site traffic?
I can't say I have, honestly.
It's that hard, right? It's that hard. So chances are you're going to lose something. It's just a question of not losing everything and protecting that equity. Any other thoughts, gents, on making sure that, because the SEO value is it really is, it's money in the bank that you can lose. Any other thoughts on how you can keep that and yet eliminate websites?
Yeah, Drew, what we have found is, and this is a little bit of a generalization, typically, and we've done this quite a bit, and we like to merge into one website. For us today, it's the precisely.com site. We usually find that there's a core set of pages that are doing the most work for a website. And so, again, utilizing some of the outside expertise that Josh mentioned, and as well as some of the folks that I'm fortunate to have on my team, we do a pretty good job of focusing in and getting a handle on what those pages are. And then our strategy has been to recreate those pages in terms of topics and keywords on our new site, and then redirect from the old pages to kind of signal to Google, this is where this great content you've been rewarding is going to permanently live going forward. And so it's not perfect. I agree with Grant. You always give a little bit, but I feel like, at some point you kind of have to take your medicine, and then you start to get that cumulative effect and the benefit over time.
And you've seen it at some point in time. In theory, you're going to be stronger because you did this consolidation, but you're going to take a hit is basically what you're saying. And part of that is, Kevin, as you're describing it, it sounds like you get 70 or 80% of the goodness from the old site, but you're going to lose it because some of that's just so long tail stuff you can't do it all.
That's exactly right, Drew. And, I think over time you start to kind of catch up, and you hope you build from there. But absolutely right. I think there's just a little bit of a reality, at least in my experience, that you have to face, and you take that medicine, and then you start building back from there. But you can preserve. You really can preserve a good chunk of that value with a thoughtful approach, like some of the things Josh was mentioning.
Right. Okay. So let's say you've acquired one of these brands that's in your portfolio, and you're just not sure how strong it is. And I'm wondering how you go about assessing and measuring the strength of these brands so you make sure. And I'm curious, Grant, what your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do it. We've actually developed a proprietary framework because we're trying to bring the brands along to where they help us build equity at Emburse. You can do it formally by, talking to customers directly, unaided, aided awareness testing, brand tracking testing, but you can also do what I call a proxy for measuring it. You look at a variety of things around awareness and perception, coverage, reach, engagement. And so that's what we've done. We've amalgamated those various measurements and have an overall quarterly tracker. And then we can see, what goes up, goes down. And to your point, Drew, if you start to see the overall Emburse go up, and say one of the sub brands, is diminished, as long as the aggregate is higher, then it gives you a little more confidence. Especially as other customers are adopting the brand in house, the master brand, that you can move away from that one a little bit more quickly. But you do want to have some objective measures in addition to subjective judgment.
Interesting. Okay, so you have a brand health proxy, which is made up of a number of fairly easy to measure things, whether it's site traffic or share of PR, or maybe it's some site traffic to pages, but whatever those little
net
proxies
promoter
are.
score, customer sat. There's lots of ways that you can get a sense of your brand affiliation and strength. Exactly.
Right. Okay. And then you track those, and then in an ideal world, you see one go up and one go down, but the net is higher, and therefore you can sort of start to say, oh, okay, we're doing what we set out to do. Any other thoughts on that, Kevin or Josh?
Yeah, we're probably not quite as sophisticated as Grant is. We rely very heavily on our customers and going out and speaking to customers. We do some surveys of kind of customers and prospective customers as well, just to get a sense. But yeah, that's probably been kind of the approach that we've taken.
Right. And Josh?
Yeah, I would agree with Grant. I think qualitative feedback is just so important. Too often we try and find all these objective, right, metrics, and those are helpful and they're useful, but your customers will tell you, right, if a brand is frustrating, if it's confusing, if it's not defined. The problem with metrics, objective metrics, is it's like asking how much smoke is in the bar, right? Do you measure it by the number of smokers, by the number of cigarettes in the ashtray, by the number of ashtrays on the table? All those different ways can help to measure it, but you really have to kind of settle on one and or two. Digital reputation is important for us. Gartner Peer Insights, Glassdoor, our reputation online is very important because that's voice of the customer. But I would never neglect the qualitative side of things by just getting in front of customers and asking.
And by the way, is it good to have smoke in the barn or bad to have smoke in the barn as we're measuring
the bar. I'm dating myself.
I see. Yeah,
when you could smoke in the bar.
I knew I was missing something. All right. Well, this is the moment in the show where we ask, what would Ben Franklin say? And here, one of the things I'm going to suggest is that Ben might not say "rip the Band-Aid" and based on this quote. Let all things have their places. Let each of your businesses have its time. So let's not rip the Band-Aid and drop the legacy brands without at least a careful migration strategy. Okay. All right. Thank you, Ben. Amazing to have you join us here. Okay. So we've all seen it where brands have just hung on. They just don't go away, and there's still a tiny bit a part of it. And I guess we've sort of covered this idea of when you know it's time. Have you ever been in a situation currently or before where you actually retired a brand when it was a little too early?
I have not, but I have been the customer of companies who have retired brands way too late, or they did a really poor, and it taught me how not to do it. They did a really poor job of defining the roadmap for the brand, and it conflicted with, Salesforce does a lot of great acquisitions. I don't know if I can name them here, but they do a lot of great acquisitions. When they acquired Pardot, it was a mess. It was like their redheaded stepchild. They did not define the roadmap. We didn't know if they were going to make investments in it. It was competing against their marketing cloud. And they've done tons of great acquisitions really well. So this was one that they had just missed on. And it really taught me as a customer that it is really important to define the brand and help the customer understand what the roadmap and investment for the brand will look like.
Yeah, I think that's, by the way, really fair game to talk about other companies and brands that have done it. Yeah, it's funny. And I think Salesforce has been obviously a hugely acquisitive company. But it is interesting that Oracle acquired Eloqua and Adobe acquired Marketo and Salesforce acquired Pardot. And, these are all three tools that do the same thing. And all of them, with the exception so far of Adobe and Marketo, stumbled. And that's just so interesting. And part of it is, and this gets back to some of the things that you said, Josh, is the community. I went to Marketo Nation. I danced with these people for hours. And this, is a really fun, connected group. They believe they're Marketoans. I mean, they are part of this community. And so to take away that would be because they've been trained, they've been certified, they're part of it, is a big deal. And I think that's part of this affinity that we've sort of been talking about. And that's really an amazing state to get to as a brand, is to have this kind of affinity. Very few brands get there. So anyway, that just an observation in this. And I wonder from your standpoint, gents, if you've seen in some of the brands, even the smaller ones, where you have that kind of sort of dedication to the brand, where there's really a true community built around it.
I've got an interesting one for you, Drew. So we formed a partnership several years ago with IBM supporting their business-to-business integration products. So we do some development and support work with them. And they had moved for that line of products to, it was the time where the Watson brand was so hot and all the rage. And so they had branded it Watson. And since we've been working with them over the last couple of years, they've actually gone back to the brand of Sterling, which was the original name of the product line, because the customers just never could move on from it. They love that brand. And it's been one of the strategies that's really made that kind of a healthy and thriving product line by bringing it back to Sterling and moving on from Watson, despite that being all the rage not too long ago.
And you suspect that's because there was a strong community. I can't remember what Sterling did, but because they had also acquired like Sugar CRM, I think was their sort of Eloqua type product. What was Sterling? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so this is particularly the business-to-business collaboration and integration products.
Right.
But it was just it's a great product, and the customers who used it worked and they loved it, and they just really didn't want to let go of it. And I think to IBM's credit, they recognized that and they made the shift back, and have certainly benefited from that.
It's so interesting because IBM is sort of this. I mean, it is the ultimate in, if you think about branded house. I mean, that branded house. I mean, they have made everything. Every acquisition becomes, and they have a whole sort of blue washing group that comes in and builds around it. So there was a case where the Sterling brand was stronger than IBM. That's fascinating.
Well, I've got an IBM anecdote because I was acquired by IBM in 2006 at FileNet, and exactly you say, blue wash. It says, we're going to take your website away in 6 months. You're not doing $1 billion in revenue. You're not at Lotus Tivoli level, and therefore you're going to go away. I said, well, that's okay. I was talking with the CEO, but we're producing 2,000 leads. Do you want those to go away? So fast forward 18 months later, the website was merged. They weren't going to do it in 6 months because there are those pragmatic considerations, as you said, Drew, about community and customers and demand you're generating. You just can't simply merge and, it all becomes additive.
Yes, exactly. It becomes additive. I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, and this is why this is so challenging. And I wanted to talk about this. You acquire these companies because you want the business value, right? What you want are their customers. What the customers want is the connection that they had to the brand and obviously the product or service. It's so fascinating because the goals are not necessarily aligned in any given acquisition. All right. So let's say that we've started to get rid of some of these brands. How are you making sure that your prospects and customers can still differentiate? Because you still have these offerings that were named that. So how do you, what's the branding strategy or sub-brand strategy? Is it all just descriptive names? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think, Drew, that's what we've tried to do, is we've tried to just be clear about what the products are and what they do, and trying to align as best as we can to some of the industry terms that the analysts and others use. And again, speaking more to the capabilities that align to the needs of the customers and the market trends.
Okay. So
go ahead.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just add one of the things that I've done that I found that's helped is to create a brand hierarchy and naming conventions. And so in addition to, what products are at the brand level and what are at the descriptive level, that, you might have a number of sub brands and the master brand, and then everything else is, sort of at a different hierarchy at level, because, us as consumers and our customers can retain, maybe a couple of levels, right? So everything, you can't have, 20 things being equal. So as, Josh mentioned earlier, Kevin as well, is you have to have this, priority. Where are you going to get the revenue from? Where's your growth? And get behind those brands or those product lines. But everything needs some logical structure. Again, helping customers make decisions to differentiate, choose your products, choose among your products. All that I think helps.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been on B2B websites where I'll see brand, I'll see a secondary brand, and then I'll see a feature that's branded, and I'm thinking, wait, what are this is like going back to the days of certs and a sparkling drop of Retsin. I mean, where you and you just as a B2B customer, you just can't get there. I mean, you can get there, but you want to get rid of it because it's not helping you. All right, so we're gonna recap now with some of the biggest lessons learned, just real quick. Grant, lead us off. What are sort of in this process for you? What's the biggest lessons learned?
Well, bringing everybody along on this journey. So first of all, internal, you have to have a realistic, consolidation, integration timeline. As was said earlier, communicate, over communicate. You need to celebrate milestones and successes. You want to reinforce the progress you've made, and make sure customers are coming along with you on that journey, and so they'll embrace your change. And actually, change management itself is something not to underestimate, because we all get comfortable, just like with friends, with brands, and so just bring the groups along, all the stakeholders together in an iterative fashion.
Yeah. Josh, lessons learned.
Yeah, I think the big one is brand strategy, brand integration is not done and should not be done in the boardroom. There are so many more stakeholders that you need to bring along. And we've talked a lot about timing, collaboration, and communication, right? And so making sure that marketing is leading the charge in this collaborative process and not kind of railroading or just coming up with a plan independently. And it's also about quick wins. What are quick wins that continue to build equity within the brand for customers, for employees of acquired companies? Like, how can we be helpful instead of just coming in and being a bull in a china shop?
Right. And I love the comment about the boardroom. It's so important because you've made the acquisition. Let's rip the Band-Aid. Let's do it. We'll put it on a 3-month timetable and go. And we know that's problematic. All right, Kevin, last licks.
Yeah, get customers, get employees, get partners involved early and often. Let them in on the secret. In the case of Precisely, when we revealed a new name, let them in on the secret. People want to be in the know. And just no surprises with customers. Bring them along for the journey. You don't want to put a shock to the system. You want to, reap the benefits of getting everyone behind the effort and building that excitement and momentum. And you can do that in a way that doesn't, wreck any kind of a big reveal. It can actually generate a lot of momentum and goodwill and feeling for people out of the gates.
I love it. All right. Well, we're gonna bring our customers along. We're gonna bring our employees along, and we're gonna do this methodically, and we're gonna make sure that it's a little bit of fun too. All right. Thank you, Grant, Kevin, and Josh. You guys are great sports. Thank you, Barr Hill, for making such a fantastic Tomcat Gin, and thank you, audience, for staying with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we'll be talking about building effective partnerships with Michael Welts, Melissa Sargent, and Denise Brody. All right, cue the music. Renegade Thinkers Live is produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our botanical expert is Nicole Hernandez. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.